Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and I'm super duper excited about this guest that reached out to me recently and has a fascinating family story that has to do with some archaeological finds that were done around the turn of the 20th century, late 19th century, that were pretty astonishing. Now, a lot of people think that these are not real. These relics are not legit. There are others who think that some of them are. And we're going to kind of explore that story about the Michigan tablets or the Michigan relics that many people are aware of, just both inside and outside of the restoration. Matter of fact, as a little boy growing up, I was fascinated by these objects and found them to be truly fascinating. And it really sparks the imagination to think that there was perhaps an ancient lost civilization that was Christian that lived here in America, which kind of parallels the story of the Book of Mormon. My guess is the grandson of Milton Hunter, who was a general authority, who actually had these items in his possession, was sent by the church to collect these, or you can clarify the story and tell me the whole thing. Alex Koritz is the grandson of Milton. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Big fan of the show.
Yeah, and this is what I love about this show is that we like to explore all the different facets of the restorations and also people who have made claims of finding plates or other of lost civilizations, whether it's Matthew Gill in England or it's the Brewers Cave in Utah, which I've had some scholars talk about that, finding lost plates, lost civilization, apparently Jaredite mummies, right? Right
Yeah.
there. Right there in Manti, Utah. It's a fascinating story. And I just like to put it out there. Let's put the information out there and let people decide. Now, I don't, one thing I meant to mention to you off camera is kind of funny. Did you notice that when I posted something about the Michigan Relics, when I posted your article, that Thomas Murphy made a comment on it? Do you know who Thomas Murphy is?
I do know who Thomas Murphy is. Yeah, yeah, DNA expert. I didn't catch the comment though. Wait, remind me what he
Thomas
said.
Murphy
I can
commented.
imagine he's skeptical. I can
Well, of course, he
imagine.
would be skeptical, but he says, well, if any of these relics are proven to be authentic, they need to be reparated back to the tribes, the original tribes, to the Native American
Yeah.
population of Michigan. And he brought that to the table, which is interesting. I like
Yeah.
voice in this conversation as well. Thomas Murphy,
He's great.
you
Yeah.
are
And
an awesome, yes, he's an awesome.
identifying who the mound builders were is challenging too. So that's a whole other
It
subject.
is. Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. And of course, Thomas Murphy wrote a paper with Sorensen, not Sorensen, I was Simon Southerton, based on an interview that we did on my channel a couple years ago, talking about the Heartland model. He kind of tackled the Mesoamerican model 20 plus years ago. And of course, he's a pretty well-regarded anthropologist and has also done some work regarding the Heartland model as well. And speaking of which, I do have to remind everybody just real quick. I almost forgot about this. We got to talk about this, folks. All right. On Thursday, April 18th, I will be the keynote speaker, the evening primetime speaker at the Firm Foundation Expo Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. I'm very excited about it. This is just the picture with me, but it's a who's who of people that are speaking. This is probably one of the second largest conferences in all of the restoration, second probably only to General Conference as well. So I will see
That's
you April 18th. I'm very excited. Probably on the 17th, especially for those of you who cannot make the speech on the 18th or going to come to both. Please, if you want a more intimate affair, I usually get about 20 to 30 people to show up for our meetups. We'll be doing a meetup probably on Wednesday the 17th as well. And I want to thank my friend Randy Bell, who's let me stay at his condo in Park City. You are an awesome human, another great person who's been on this program. And that's really what this is about, making connections. So I'm looking forward to it. March
great.
15th is the early bird deadline to sign up to get your discounted tickets. So you can buy one-day passes or passes for all 3 days. Go to bookofmormonevidence.org or just type Book of Mormon Evidence and it's going to take you right there. Well, Alex, this is a fascinating topic. And okay, so I just want to make sure it's your grandfather, Milton Hunter, was a general authority. And
Mhm.
and at the time, it was actually a pretty elite group of, general authorities have been expanded greatly since
Yeah,
then.
yeah, really good point. The quorum was small, and he was in the presidency of the quorum. He was quite a prominent general authority in his day. It's older members of the church that remember him, but he wrote a lot and was considered quite a scholar. So
And so you basically, I just want to, before we get started with the slide presentation, you actually talk a little bit about yourself in the slide presentation. It's going to kind of be an informal one where he's going to talk a little bit about his past, the story of his grandfather, the connection that you have with your grandfather that you feel a deep connection to, even though you weren't
yeah,
even born when he passed away. So anything you want to add to this before you start the slideshow?
Just that, I was talking about your show the other day, and the reason I'm a big fan is because you uniquely can bridge multiple worlds. You can have a John Dehlin on and then a faithful scholar, in the same episode, and that's really rare and unique. So hats off to you. You're doing great work.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, why don't you go ahead and start the
Yeah.
presentation? I'm just going to interject now and then. Maybe I'll ask a question or want clarification. I'm always fascinated by this kind of stuff. The idea that we can possibly find relics of lost civilizations, and the Michigan relics have been part of the story, and people have discussed them, and that's what's interesting is that there has also been people who are non-Latter-day Saints who have been intrigued by these Michigan relics as well, and they've done some research on it as well. So we're going to have a little conversation about it.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the biggest supporters have had nothing to do with Mormonism. Um, and I should talk about, kind of my motivations here. And first of all, any apologies for historical mistakes. I'm not a scholar, but I think I can uniquely provide some perspective of the family. And my motives here, my spirituality is not dependent on whether the Book of Mormon is historical or not. So I'm not out to prove anything. My main motive is that these relics really deserve kind of their day in court, and I think should be looked at seriously. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the criticisms and some of the evidences, and just have a good discussion.
Awesome.
Okay, let's jump in. Like you said, I'll tell a little bit about my story and how that ties into artifacts. I don't love talking about myself, so maybe I'll go fast. But pretty typical upbringing for a Mormon boy in Utah. Was raised in Sandy, just really a suburb on the East Bench, about a half hour south of Salt Lake City. Pretty typical family as well. I have a younger brother, older sister, and then a twin sister, and we're quite close as well. And my dad was in the military and worked for the post office, and my mom was an English teacher. So, you're pretty standard family there. As you alluded to, and I'll talk more about my grandpa a little bit later on, but I'm sure you've had people in your family line or grandpa or great grandpa that you felt kind of a connection to, and he's always been that for me. In fact, my middle name is Milton, so I'm named after him. He died 2 years before I was born, but I sort of, there was this running joke in the family that, he had picked me and my sister specifically to come down to the family, and we always kind of felt this bond to him. But anyway, I grew up even as like a 12-year-old reading his books about the Mayans and the Toltecs and the Olmecs, and really falling in love with Mesoamerica and other cultures as well. I loved Egypt as a kid, but I think just having my grandpa who wrote those books really ignited that passion within me. So went through high school years, ran cross country in high school, and then came my mission years. So reading all my grandpa's books, of course, I wanted to go to, Central America or even South America somewhere to go to the Book of Mormon lands, right? But I got my call to Ohio, and I was still excited. It's a lot of the Doctrine and Covenants was revealed there, a lot of church history, but I didn't know much about the mound builder culture and anything like that. And so it wasn't until years later that I realized Ohio is the heartland, really, of the mound builders, and within the Hopewell model, the North American model, the Heartland model. There you go. Ohio is key, right? So anyway, looking back, it's interesting. I served right by the Chillicothe Mounds, where several of I think the Ten Commandments, Decalogue stone was found there, and was all around that stuff, just not really connecting it potentially to the Book of Mormon at the time. So anyway, served my mission, came home, went to college, studied journalism. I bounced around to a bunch of different schools, but ended up finishing my degree at Utah State University. So I'm a true Aggie there with a journalism degree. Which I parlayed that into public relations. These days, it's tough to really support a family in journalism, and PR is kind of the other side of journalism. So I began my career working as an intern for the Salt Lake City 2002 Winter Olympics, and I worked on the torch relay, as it would go around the world. I worked with a lot of media doing that. And then transitioned to the PR firm that was doing all the PR for the Olympics, Coulter and Associates. Was there for several years, worked on some big brands like Burger King and Sony and 3Com. Then I went to work for some different agencies. I became a founding partner of Method Communications, was there for a long time. We helped put some Utah brands that are well known, like Vivint and Qualtrics and Instructure. We helped launch those and put them on the map. In 2016, we were named the top tech agency in North America, so that was a great win there. Around 2018, I sold my shares in the company and kind of moved on and started my own company, Koritz Communications, which was really just me and some other freelancers. But I've done some work for the UN and other clients through Koritz Communications. And then about a year ago, I still do my own thing, but I joined another PR agency called Thatcher and Co. And they are a great agency. They do a lot of international work and a lot of tech work. And Bonneville Communications bought them about the same time as I joined. So in a roundabout way, I now work for the church. And the church kind of, they let us do our thing. I mean, we work with Google and tech companies like that, but we'll also do some church projects here and there. I don't know if you're familiar with Giving Machines.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we did all the PR for that. So we'll get a little church stuff here and there, but we're really more of a tech firm. So anyway, that's me and my career. And I do some freelancing, some freelance writing on the side, which I'll talk about a little bit. During this time, got married, had kids. There's a picture there, and I forgive the collage style design is not my thing. But 3 kiddos, beautiful wife, definitely the better half, the better 3/4 really. And then around this time too, I started to get more interested in the Michigan Relics. This is probably, I don't know, 2014 or so.
Okay.
And it became a bit of a crusade, and I'll kind of walk through
And just real quick, Alex, so basically, you said you got an interest in around 2014. Were you aware of your grandfather's work in this field before that, or was this, and then you just kind of decided to really look into it in 2014?
Yeah, kind of the latter. Yeah, I was always aware, and kind of aware of the story, not in detail though. So I started to find out a little bit, kind of what happened and how my family, in a way, was treated quite unfairly around what happened. And so that, I mean, to be honest, it kind of made me a little bit mad. So it became a little bit of a crusade, and we'll get into
Right.
kind of how that went down. But yeah, good question. And then, life progressed and I got interested in humanitarian work, and I'm on the board of Choice Humanitarian. It's a 40-year-old nonprofit based in Utah, but they do work all over the globe. So I've gone with them and done work in Nepal and Bolivia and Peru. Really great group. And then during this period, I went through a divorce with my previous marriage, and just was kind of going through a hard time, kind of classic, classic struggle, midlife crisis kind of thing, and having a lot of doubt in my faith and in my beliefs and what I really thought spiritually. And I came across a book called Autobiography of a Yogi, and it's written by Paramahansa Yogananda, and it's considered one of the best spiritual memoirs of all time. And that book just lit me on fire. And what I was really looking for spiritually after, I had a great upbringing in the church, but instead of just dogma and doctrine, I was really looking for an experiential spirituality. So something that I could feel and have experiences with. And frankly, too much of religion has this middleman, whether it's a priest, bishop, whatever that is. And I wanted to remove the middleman and have direct experiences. So that's kind of what I was looking for. And I wasn't setting aside the church or Christianity or anything like that, but I did look Eastern for a while. I also got interested in Buddhism, which of course is just a branch of Hinduism. But I really got involved with Yogananda's teachings and the group SRF that he established in the 1920s. I even got initiated within that tradition. There was a Utah teacher in that tradition named Philip McClure that I worked with as well quite a bit. So that's been, a big part of my spiritual path.
Yeah.
Not every spiritual principle or practice is going to resonate with everybody, right? So I think we need to take some responsibility and craft our own little world there.
Yeah, eclectic people find a lot of appeal in this eclectic channel that we're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I know you've talked about that before, so
Yeah,
I know it
that's
resonates.
great. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and then just some, spirituality became a big interest, and I write for Patheos, which is
Yeah,
one of the largest religion journals, and the church actually owns that now. They bought that about a year ago.
right.
Um,
Yeah, and
but
it's interesting
yeah,
because it was your Patheos article that you
yeah,
wrote recently that got me to interest. I think you posted in my Utah Interfaith Forum group, and that's where I found it, and then we started the conversation there.
yeah, exactly. So that's been a lot of fun
Right.
writing there. Okay. All right. So
This is your
moving.
grandfather.
Yeah.
All
This is
right.
this is Gramp. So Elder Milton R. Hunter. So like I mentioned, one of my heroes. I've always felt just kind of close to him. Um, he came out of Holden, Utah, just a small little town of Scottish descent. So his grandparents were in the Martin Handcart Company. And it's actually a really interesting story. So his grandma and her little brother were in the Martin Handcart Company, and they got stranded, of course, up in Martin's Cove in Wyoming in the plains there. Um, and my other ancestor named Sidney Teeples. Oh yeah, it looks like you got a book right there about the handcarts. But so my other ancestor, Sidney Teeples, it's a cool story. He was on his horse just going to Draper, and he heard a voice that said, "Turn around and go back to Salt Lake City." So he turned around and went back, and they were organizing the rescue parties to go get the Martin Handcart Company. And so he went with the party. And when they found my other ancestor, she and her little brother, and her name was Nicholas Gurley, they were so hungry they were eating bark off of trees. That's just how desperate they were. And so those two, my one ancestor and then the other ancestor, ended up getting married. So that it was kind of an interesting story. And then I descend through that line. So fun. That's all my mom's side, all the church history stuff. My dad's a convert, so it stays on my mom's side. Anyway, back to my grandpa. He got his PhD from Berkeley, and he was really a rising star within that school. And his mentor wanted him to stay at Berkeley and do his career there. But my grandpa got an offer from the seminary, LDS seminary in Utah State University, and wanted to do that. So he went on up there, and his mentor at Berkeley was horrified and mad, but he wanted to do that. And so he went and taught most of his career at the Institute of Religion up there until he was called to be a 70, and that was in 1945. And so all this time he would on the side write about archaeology and trying to tie the Book of Mormon to the Mayan civilizations and Toltec. So he always kept that going, and even as a general authority, he kept doing that. And you probably wouldn't see that as much today, but they had a little more latitude back then to write about what they wanted.
So Alex, real quick, I want
Yeah,
you. So you're going to talk about the New World Archaeological Foundation. He was the
yeah,
co-founder of that. I see. When you're going to start that, I want you to exit out of the presentation because I just want to briefly riff on him a little bit, if you don't mind,
yeah,
about that. So, are you ready to talk about that now?
yeah. That's great.
Okay. So before, why don't you exit out now, and then we'll do like a prelude to what you were going to talk about, because it's a really fascinating story. and I'm trying to find. Okay, well, first of all, I just wanted to share. So apparently, he was a co-founder. I'm assuming it was Thomas Stewart Ferguson.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Okay,
And that was one
and
of his writing partners. They did several books together.
okay, and so that's fascinating. I just want to point out to everybody, if you go to Benchmark Books, um, they have these on sale for $1.99. I just last time I was in Utah, they had a stack of these, and this
Wow.
tells the story of Thomas Stewart Ferguson's archaeological search for the Book of Mormon, and how he's the co-founder of the New World Archaeological Foundation. And in one of these series, in Signature Books series, there's actually I think it's this one. A lot of familiar names here, to say the least. That talks about it. Let's just see. Okay, I don't see. I know there's a. Yeah, I don't see it now. But in one of these in this series that they did on Signature Books, they actually did a chapter on Thomas Stewart Ferguson. This was a man who set out to find the Book of Mormon lands in basically in the what we call the Mesoamerica area, and
Yeah.
kind of was the person that kind of spearheaded the efforts to use archaeology to prove the Book of Mormon, and felt very confident that they would find it. Now, he would later lose his testimony in the Book of Mormon, and
Mhm.
ironically enough, not because of the archaeological aspect, which he wasn't in his mind was not successfully able to prove that the Book of Mormon took place down
Yeah.
there. But what it was his breakdown of the Book of Abraham papyri, and he started studying that, and he actually kind of lost his testimony of the Book of Mormon by reading that. Now that's a separate story, and I actually like to talk about it. I just wanted to bring that, kind of give a little, flesh it
Yeah.
out, a little background. It's a really interesting story. Again, these are complicated stories, complicated people. Not everything's going to be nice and tidy for you, but I just want to talk about the
Exactly.
context. So maybe you
Exactly.
have anything you want to say about that before we go back to the slide presentation?
Yeah, and to your point, not everything nice and tidy. I mean, that's what makes it interesting, right? I mean, yeah, people are imperfect and have opinions, and but yeah. So my grandpa had talked about that. They were really close. Ferguson was a brilliant lawyer. I believe he was a trained attorney, but just a brilliant mind. Yeah, they did a lot of work together, and Ferguson eventually lost his faith. And I think you're right. I think the papyri was kind of the main catalyst, but even some of the archaeology, he just was like, "This isn't working. We're not finding anything." And of course, my grandpa was faithful till the day he died, and he said, my mom said that it broke his heart. So it was really hard on my grandpa that Ferguson fell away, but they remained friends. They remained close.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating story, folks. If you ever want to read about it, just to study Ferguson. It's really an interesting faith journey. And of course, that expedition was originally funded by the church, correct?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's still associated with a lot with BYU, and it's
Mhm.
quite prominent in the archaeology world.
Yep, yep. So that's kind of gives you the history. So your grandfather played a major role in helping get this started. Fascinating. I didn't know
Yeah,
that. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
great.
It's really interesting, and Ferguson was an interesting guy, and it's kind of a sad story in a way because I don't think he ever recovered even belief in God, but I could be wrong about that, but you know, it's sad in a way, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we'll go
Uh,
back to the presentation. This is cool.
okay,
I'm
yeah,
loving it.
I appreciate you interjecting because that it's an important point. Okay, let's see here. All right. So we talked about the New World Archaeology Foundation, and then yeah, he was the author of about 23 books, which I have not read all of them, but yeah, this might be a good spot too. There's a few things I inherited from him that I could even show.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Why don't you show some of the stuff you got, and exit out again just so
Oh
you can
yeah, so
get a
it'll be
better
a
view of it.
little bit closer.
But it's also, before we do that, so he wrote some books, a lot of them having to do with Book of Mormon and archaeology and lost civilizations. So that's kind of like that's very important to him, was that foundation and trying to prove the Book of Mormon using archaeology. And that seemed to be his life's passion.
Yeah, yeah, and he and Ferguson kind of pioneered a lot of that even before Dibley. I mean, they were doing that stuff. And you're right, that is what drove him. That was his passion. His other area was Utah history, and so he wrote a lot of books, really on the academic side. Um, and then he wrote a lot of just gospel books, like Gospel Through the Ages. There was quite popular in the '60s, I believe.
Cool.
And he wrote some manuals, church manuals, and that kind of thing. Um, this guy here.
So I want close out of
Oh yeah, yeah.
this presentation so we can get a better view. Okay.
There we go. So this is an Olmec head with a jade covering. Um, and the Olmec are fascinating. And I know you know about the Olmec, but they're so mysterious, right?
Yeah.
Because they look Asian, they look African, but
Mhm.
then there's Caucasians with beards. Like, who are these people, right?
Right, right. And not only that, but there's a lot of people who think they're the Jaredites, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mormons think they're the Jaredites. Non-Mormons, some think it's the what dynasty was it? I think the Shin dynasty for the Chinese coming there, and then some Africans and Hebrews even. It to me feels like, if we're stepping out of the Mormon context, to me it feels like it was an ancient New York City, like a port town where all these cultures were going to and trading and things like that. And there's some theories that Chichen Itza was a university, so people were coming from all over to study at Chichen Itza. One day we'll find out. I don't know. It's fascinating though.
Yeah, there's a lot to be uncovered up there. And it's fast. And of course, we're going to talk about diffusionism because I definitely
Yeah.
diffusionism definitely plays a role in this. And just to give you context, when I know you're gonna visit in the thing, but just remember, folks, like even Michael Coe, who was one of the chief critics of the Mesoamerican model and wrote some papers about it. Actually, went on Mormon Stories with John DeLynn and talked about it as well. He still does admit that he thinks there was a Chinese diffusion influence going on in that region of the world. So the idea of diffusionism is not some wacky theory out there. More and more people are coming around to the idea that there was probably, and when you stop and think about it, even the trade routes will take you right up into Florida.
Yeah.
The way some of the patterns
Right.
are, we've
And
shown that with the
yeah.
Phoenician expedition. So to say there wasn't some intermingling, I'm skeptical of that. I think most people are now more open to the idea that there was some cross-Atlantic and Pacific cross-pollination going on as
Yeah.
well between the New
Yeah,
and the Old World.
exactly. Particularly younger scholars are more open to it now.
Yeah.
And you got to give credit to Mormon academics that were talking about diffusion, 50 years ago. So they paved a lot of that. Actually, Sorensen did a lot of botany work about different plants that have crossed the oceans and things like that. And that work has been cited around
Yeah.
the world just
Yeah,
by
yeah.
scholars.
So let's not just poo-poo a lot of this. There's some really good academic stuff that they've been doing at BYU as a result of these projects. So there has been some really positive, well regarded scholarship that has come out from this campus.
Yeah. Here's a Mayan thingy here. I'm not quite sure
Oh
what.
wow.
Some sort of vessel for a religious ceremony or something. It's a little creepy.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Now jumping. Oh wait, I got to show you this guy from Israel. So this dates to the 1st century, an oil lamp from Israel, and it's got Star of David on it, and it's in amazing shape. Like that, I'm scared to even touch that
And those
sometimes.
and those came from your grandfather.
That one didn't. That I bought from a different
But the
collector.
other ones that okay. So you're
Yeah.
interested in this. You're interested in
Yeah.
relative
Oh yeah.
looking, digging in the earth and finding out about civilizations. That's great. I think it's a passion of yours that you
Oh,
inherited
it
from
totally
your
is.
grandfather.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. In another world, I would have been an archaeologist, another lifetime.
Yeah.
Jump into North America. So Hopo Mound Builders. This is a broken axe head.
Okay.
But this was found in Ohio, right out of a mound, I think in the 1800s, and I bought this from another collector. So that's kind of cool. And then Michigan, we're going to talk about Michigan. This is a pure copper axe head from Michigan, and we'll get into that. But the copper mines in northern Michigan have been mined for 3,000 years. It's another mysterious
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
Who was doing that, right?
Right. I know.
This is a effigy pipe. These are really rare. It's a Hopo pipe.
Okay.
Uh, they're worth quite a bit and really hard to find. They just didn't last. So that guy is this is from Ross County, Ohio, too.
Hmm.
So anyway, yeah, I thought it'd be kind of fun to show a few of those.
Oh, thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. So why don't we continue with the presentation?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, to your point, I thought it'd be a good way to just kind of set the stage and talk about some of my favorite examples of or evidences of diffusion. And just like you were pointing out, traditionally there's been kind of a battle between the diffusionists and the isolationists, and it's starting to change a little bit more. But copper is interesting because copper has a unique signature, almost like a DNA print. Um, anywhere you find copper, it has a unique a mix of metals. And Michigan is totally unique. It's 99.9% pure copper, which is quite rare. So they can identify where it comes from. And so when scholars found this shipwreck, the Uluburun, it was a Minoan shipwreck. It's considered the oldest shipwreck in the world, 1300 BC. And they brought it up from the bottom. And what did they find? Copper ingots from Michigan. No other way it could have got there. So whoever was mining those ancient Michigan mines were trading copper all over the world. And to fuel the Bronze Age, you needed a huge amount of copper. So that makes sense that was happening during that time period. This left here is a map of the Keweenaw Peninsula in northern Michigan. And then there's the Isle Royale right next to it. And that's where the copper mines were. So way up at the top there. There's so much pure copper there. They call it free or floating copper. You literally can walk around and even today find just solid pieces of copper.
Wow.
And then there's a picture of that Minoan shipwreck.
Fascinating.
The Back Creek Stone, a little more well-known. The History Channel's done a few things on it. So it was found actually by the Smithsonian Institute. And they of course are very traditional, very conservative, right? So they would have been in the isolationist camp. And so what they did, they put it on display at the Smithsonian, and there was a scholar named Silas Gordon who was studying it and said, you know what? They have this upside down. And so they flipped it right side up, and it was a Paleo Old Hebrew, a version of Hebrew that said for Judea or to Judea or something like that. So that's quite interesting. And there's still some scholars that say, no, it's a form of Cherokee. So it's still debated.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's probably the Bat Creek Stone of all the relics, I think, has the strongest argument in favor. Like that to me, that's a data point that at least should be taken into consideration.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. These are two of my other favorites. So German scientists, studying Egyptian mummies, found tobacco and marijuana, which only comes from the Americas. So the American goods were making their way to ancient Egypt. So again, diffusion. There's just no other way that could have happened, unless those plants floated across the ocean or something. And then the Kensington runestone is also fairly well known because of the History Channel. But 13th century or 14th century Nordic writing, right? So the Vikings were up in Minnesota, and it was a land claim. And Scott Wolter is famous for kind of highlighting this, and he was a well-known geologist.
Yeah, and just to give you context, so Scott Walter would probably be considered a hyper diffusionist.
Yeah.
He would be like one extreme representing that position. I've probably been studying the Kensington runestone longer than him. When I think about, I was
Really?
reading about it and
Yeah.
since the 90s, and so I don't know if it was on his radar screen back then, but I always found that to be fascinating. And I'm still skeptical about it, but I just think it's another data point that needs to be taken into consideration. That I think that we have to at least have an open mind approaching these topics.
Yeah, exactly. And even traditional scholars are starting to acknowledge the Vikings were here about 1000. And some schools don't teach Columbus that discovered America anymore. A lot still do. Really shouldn't. He didn't. The Vikings were here well before Columbus, and Columbus did some horrible things. It really shouldn't be celebrated. Anyway,
we need to reassess a lot of that as well. But and again, we know that they was it Newfoundland, in Canada, they found a Viking encampment that predates a settlement that predates Columbus. So this is not some kind of baddie crackpot theory here. And so it does, the Kensington runestone does seem to kind of fit within that time frame on some level. So at least, again, just an interesting thing to ponder.
I also find it interesting that they claim that if it was a land claim, they were claiming the Minnesota area, and then in the 1800s, all the Scandinavians settled in Minnesota because like Sweden, right? All the water and things like that. So
Yep.
isn't that interesting? That's where they first went, and then they end up settling there.
Yep. It's always interesting. Some people think that's a reason why it's a fraud, but that's
Yeah, yeah,
well,
yeah.
how convenient. But again, that's just we got to look at this with an open eyes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
cool.
Give it its day in court. That's all we're saying, right?
Okay. Now,
Okay, now we're gonna walk through kind of the timeline of what happened, and that will also help set the stage. And it's a lot of text, forgive that, but we'll just try to walk through it. So, um, the main time period is from 1848 to 1920. And these artifacts were being dug out of the Michigan mounds, containing religious scenes, biblical scenes, mixed languages of cuneiform, Egyptian, Coptic. Um, in 1890, James Scotford was kind of one of the first to report his findings of some of the artifacts. Now we fast forward to 1907, and Daniel Soper and Reverend James Savage both were building a collection as well.
and those two names are very important in the story. These really become the center stage of whether these relics are real or not. Before we get there, I just want understanding when you have the date 1848 to 1920, they're finding these objects. Are you saying that they were finding like biblical scenes on tablets or whatever in as early as 1848? What kind of stuff were they finding before 1890, let's say, and before Soper and Savage get into here? What are some examples of finds that they found? Do you know?
Yeah, so that was the main period of the discoveries, was really 1840 to 1920. And it was the same stuff kind of the whole time, which is interesting, right? If you're doing a
Yeah.
fraud, it's going to be really tricky, which we'll talk about.
Okay.
But
Okay, great.
yeah, it's the slate tablets, the copper tablets, and the other religious
Hmm.
instruments.
Okay.
So yeah, but we'll come back to that because it's a good point. And Soper, again, to your other point, he was the Michigan Secretary of State, but he resigned in scandal for potential embezzlement. So critics will use that later on. And Reverend Savage actually had a good reputation and was well known
Was
within
he
the community.
Catholic? Was Savage a
I don't
Catholic?
I don't think so, but
Okay.
Notre Dame comes into the story.
Oh, okay,
So
got it. That's what I'm thinking. Okay.
yeah, exactly. So jump into 1910. So the RLDS Church. So Bishop Rudolph Ettenhauser, um, missionary of the RLDS Church, of course, Community of Christ today. He writes a book called Church Engravings of Prehistoric Specimens, and that really ignites a lot of interest in the Michigan artifacts once again. And that leads to other scholars kind of noticing it and picking it up. And then, of course, a lot of those scholars begin to denounce the finds. And then discoveries continue to be made, and then the press reports those people as counterfeiting and things like that. And it becomes so controversial that a national committee is created, and it's led by Professor Frederick Starr at University of Chicago, one of the best archaeology programs in the world, and particularly Egyptology. Um, and several others, and including James Talmage. So entered Dr. James Talmage, future LDS apostle.
Mhm.
So he joins the committee, and he was the director of the Deseret Museum at the time. So they form a committee to kind of do a report, and release their findings. And so the report that they released, they basically denounce it. Professor Starr believes that they were introduced by sleight of hand into the mounds. And this is despite the fact that even he by himself had found several of them.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so Talmage and Scotford and Soper, they continue to do finds, but Talmage becomes a little more suspicious. And he goes out on his own, completely by himself, and explores 22 mounds and doesn't find anything. So to him, this is a big deal. He thinks it's a fraud because he's just not finding them unless Soper is with him. So to him, that's very suspicious. Now jump into 1953. Judge Cloudstone of Peoria, Illinois, asked a respected Chicago attorney, Henrietta Mertz, to investigate the Soper-Savage collection. And the reason he tapped her is because she had a really good reputation, and she was a code breaker basically in World War II. So she was trained in forgery and also worked on code breaking with one of the precursor agencies of the CIA. So a brilliant, brilliant woman. She ends up writing, she ends up believing that the artifacts are genuine. She absolutely believes they're genuine. She writes a book and called The Mystic Symbol, which becomes famous. She dies before it's published.
Mhm.
You probably have a copy of that.
I don't have a
Uh,
copy, but I'm very, very familiar with the work. I
yeah,
should be a copy, but yeah, I'm very familiar. It's fascinating. It's really
yeah.
yeah, that mystic symbol is really interesting. Yep.
You know
Yep.
Wayne May, I think he
Yeah.
publishes it, so
Right.
you can get it through Wayne. And then we'll come back to her. But just going with the timeline, 1960. So LDS missionaries, Bird and Roundy. So over the years, the collection had made it to Notre Dame.
Okay.
And a Father Savage there, and he became in charge of the collection, and that's why his name is part of the collection. So
Right.
it's a little confusing. But LES members have continued to express interest in the collections, even despite Talmage, kind of poo-pooing them. And so these missionaries go and want to see the artifacts and get interested, and then they write home to church headquarters and contact my grandpa, who is known as a historian, a religious historian, in addition to a general authority. And he becomes quite interested in them, and he begins studying them and even starts the manuscript, which he would never finish. But anyway, that takes us up to about 1973. So now, my grandpa died in 1975, and in his will, he willed the collection to be donated to the church. And so, he passed away in 1975, and that's what happened. Now the collections end up in the church museum, but just in the basement in some racks, not displayed, just kind of put away. And some church leaders, I think, were kind of embarrassed by them. And so they didn't really want to display them. And around 2000, 2001, the church has a professor of anthropology look at the artifacts, and he was a member of the church. So Richard Stamps, he studies them. He publishes in BYU Studies, and he has a lot of criticisms, but one of his main criticisms was that modern or metal tools were used. You can tell they were used in some of these creations, particularly on the slate. But Mormons shouldn't have a problem with that, because the Book of Mormon talks about metallurgy and metal
Right.
tools. So it's a little interesting he was so hung up on that, but that was one of his main things. And so that his stamp of disapproval was kind of the final stamp of disapproval for the church. And what we kind of found out, and this isn't well known, but it was Elder Maxwell that really just wanted to get rid of the relics. He was really driving this from behind the scenes, and we found that out just through the family.
And this is
So
Neil Maxwell?
yeah,
Okay.
Neil A. Maxwell, who I respect and like, but he was kind of embarrassed by these. He commissioned Stamps to do the study and felt that that's what they needed to then get rid of them. So
Okay.
so Maxwell got that study, and then they contacted the museum at the Michigan Historical Museum. Now, the church legally could have just donated them to the museum. They didn't have to contact the family, but they did out of respect, and that was nice. And my family consented, but this was the big thing and really the crux of the matter. My family said that'd be great, because they were promised that the relics would be studied seriously and by Michigan archaeologists, like really taken seriously. So my family said, that's great. Right now they're just in a basement. So yeah. And so, they consented to it. And then, of course, almost immediately, so 2003, they're given to the museum, and then they put it under an exhibition of fraudulent artifacts in America. And there's a little, I think that's actually a picture of the sign from the exhibit. But obviously my family was upset about it. We felt misled, we felt lied to. Not necessarily by the church, I'm not saying that, but certainly the museum knew what they were going to do with the relics. So they were quite dishonest about it. But it was too late, and it become kind of a mission of mine, and so I really wanted to see what I could do. So I met with the church, and they politely, told me there's nothing they could do. It was legally donated. So I then went out to meet with the Michigan scholars and the museum, and I work in PR, so I took a documentary filmmaker with me, and he did some footage for a program he had called Nephite Explorer.
Okay, so I just want to let you know, I definitely I've watched every episode of the Nephite
Oh,
Explorer.
cool.
So I
Yeah,
guarantee I did watch it. I don't have a memory of it. I'm sure if I jotted, I'll go look for that. And that's really interesting. So you knew Ryan, and of course did that series
yeah,
Nephite Explorer. And fascinating. Okay. So
yeah.
it's
2015 season. Yeah. And
amazing.
it's a little hard to find, but maybe I'll reach out to Ryan and see if I can get a link for it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But yeah, we got some good footage. I got to say that the museum uh, administration, super nice, very accommodating. They took us back for a couple hours and pulled out the whole collection and answered our questions. And of course, they're thinking, oh, these crazy Mormons, but they were really nice. Didn't say anything like that to us. And we'd asked why they didn't. This particular scholar had a little conversation, and I wanted to see what his big hangup was, and his hangup was the mixture of the different languages. He's like, we've never seen anything like that, where there's these languages that just sort of mix. And I don't know. Other things I've read, you could debate that. Language is a moving target. It's always changing. But anyway, that was his hangup. So I wanted to put the information there. Eric Perkins is the Michigan academic in charge of it, and they'll see it. They'll show them to anybody. You just have to schedule.
Okay, so I think it's really important that to know, folks, that they are making this accessible to the public. So don't think Eric is hiding anything. If you're in the Michigan area, and is this in Ann Arbor, uh, or
No,
Lansing?
no, no. Lansing, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's in Lansing, Michigan. If you find yourself in central Michigan, take this number down and see if you can set up an appointment to go see the collection.
Yeah, yeah, they're very nice. And whether they're genuine or not, it's fascinating. It's interesting. Okay, let's see. All right. So I know our point wasn't they hit the criticisms, but I just wanted to give a really high level overview of that, which we kind of just did. Metal tool, cut marks, we just talked about that. I think to, non-Mormon scholars, that would be alarming. But Mormons talk about metallurgy in the Book of Mormon, shouldn't care about that. But so mixture languages, we talked about the sheet copper, some of the carvings were on copper that was very thin, like a sheet. That is a little suspicious. So these ancient cultures could have had that technology to make them that flat, but I don't know. And then there was a lot of speculation in Joseph Smith's time too that the mound builders were lost Israelites, lost tribes of Israel, and so that has been in the air in American history for a couple hundred years. So that adds a little suspicion to it. And then how they were found, we talked about a little bit some of the suspicions around Soper and Scottford and Soper's background and Talmage felt like they were only finding them when Soper was with them. So there's some suspicion with those characters.
And is that a photo of Soper and Savage?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, so
Yes. Yeah.
that's how they look like. Okay. Well, look
Yeah.
with some artifacts in front of the picture there. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a great picture. So that, I mean, there's more criticisms, but those are the big ones. So now we're going to hit just some of my favorite evidences. There's another picture of Soper's, Scottford, and some others. I don't know who the others are. But so I mentioned Henrietta Mertz. She's the code breaker, cryptographer, brilliant woman. Her book is really good. It's very academic, but it's accessible. Anyway, so a couple of her main points were that there is just multiple writing styles and diverse authors that are showing up, and you can tell that through different analysis. So to have one or two people or even a small group that were manufacturing these and forging these it'd be really difficult with the different styles. You'd have to have an army of people doing this. And then I'm trying to remember the time frame, but you remember 1848 to whatever it was, big time period, decades, yeah. So thousands, I think I've heard numbers up to 20,000, 30,000 found over decades of period of time. And to me, this is a big one. It's this would require a massive conspiracy. I mean, this would be a decades long strategic, government conspiracy to pull this off. It just would be impossible to do that. So again, we can come back to that a little bit. And then the tablets had what they call Bosturian style writing, which is a lot of Eastern scripts. Hebrew and Aramaic are written from right to left, backwards to us. And so that's interesting for, forgers. I suppose a forger could know that, but okay, we talked about that already. So just over the long period of time and how many were found, the conspiracy would have to be massive. This is interesting. So a lot of the religious scenes contain things that in early American Christianity would be considered heretical. There were pagan gods sometimes next to Christ and other things like that, that just if you were going to try to pull off a hoax, it'd be a weird thing to do, right? So she felt that was in evidence. And then as she analyzed a lot of the scripts and the teachings, she felt her conclusion was this was a group of Coptic Christians, which are Egyptian Christians, that in the year 300-ish were persecuted and fled and made it to the New World. That was her theory.
Well, and what's so fascinating is that this is actually one of the arguments that's being used in favor of the Book of Mormon, in that these Coptics would have practiced infant baptism, and there's a real strong anti-infant baptism take in the Book of Mormon, which seems to imply that perhaps they were encountering or in conversation with a group that advocated infant baptism, and that's why the Book of Mormon itself takes a really strong position against that, what they would consider basically to be a heresy. So it kind of, and it fits within the time frame of, if these relics are correct, and it was around 300 AD, it would actually fit within the time frame of what the text of the Book of Mormon would have been having conversation with these people if they did indeed exist.
Exactly. Yep. Perfectly said. All right. So another scholar I really respect, David Allen Dale, he has done some great work. And some of his conclusions were the same independently from Henrietta's. So he felt almost all the artifacts have what they have termed the mystic symbol on there. And at the bottom picture, you can kind of see it. It's towards the top there. Let's see if my pointer shows up.
Yep, that's the mystic symbol.
Yeah. Yep. And that's on almost everything. And he felt it was very similar to a shortened Hebrew version of Yahweh. And you can kind of pronounce it Yahweh or Yod He Va, and it kind of fits. It's a little bit of off Hebrew, but it's similar enough to where it was intriguing to him. And then he came to the same conclusion that these must be Coptic Christians because of different teachings that were showing up. And one example of that is a lot of these pictures would have the God here, and then they would have Jesus on the right hand and Satan on the left hand. And that was a very Coptic thing. And again, for 19th century American Christians to know that would be a little bizarre. And then this is my ultimate favorite, I think, evidence here. So there's what they call calendar stones. And one of the calendar stones points to a solar eclipse that other historical records can back up that happened at 34 AD. And the calendar stone points to it. And not only does it point to it, it points to exactly where that relic was found. We know from historical records that the eclipse passed right over that. Again, impossible to fake that. I don't know how you would fake it.
So that would be what we would call a bullseye. Maybe kind of like the NHM, the artifact found in Arabia. Here you have something that's it's a astronomical observation that's recorded and can be verified by that at that precise site at that time. Very interesting thought there. And of course, that also is right around the time would have been around the time of the crucifixion of the Savior.
Yeah, exactly. And archaeoastronomy is an emerging field, and it's becoming more used, more commonly. They're even looking at, there's some scholars that want to redate the Sphinx because it's aligned, it's clearly aligned to the Leo constellation, but it's not right now. So when's the last time it was pointing out Leo? Well, it's around 9,000 BC. So there's scholars that want to redate things now
Oh, don't
because
get me started about the Sphinx now, man. Come on. We're gonna bring Graham Hancock into the
Oh, I
conversation.
love Graham Hancock. I didn't know you were a fan. He's
Just
great.
I actually met him. I met him at
Yeah.
a bookstore on the north side of Chicago in the 90s and got had a very, very nice man. Had him autograph one of my books. This one had
No
to do with
way.
the structures on Mars. I love this stuff, man. This is right in my wheelhouse.
Oh, me too. I love Graham Hancock. I've read everything he's written. He's and John Anthony West, that whole crew, right?
Oh yeah, like that. That very interesting stuff. I remember watching that documentary about the Sphinx in the 1990s, with Charlton Heston was the host of it, and just was totally blown out of the water. And it's so exciting
Yeah.
at the thought that perhaps there's a, which by the way, now we know that no, everybody was saying, well, it's not possible because we don't have any record of ancient civilizations would have been around at that time that could have been possibly built it. And then we find Göbekli Tepe that in Turkey that rewrites human archaeological history
Yeah.
and civilization as we know it. But again, we digress. Let's continue on.
Yeah, we'll have to take that offline because I love that stuff. Uh, all right. Oh, well, yeah, that kind of takes us to the end. So
Okay.
we could have kept talking about Egypt.
Yeah, well, this was first of all, why don't we exit out and let's just let it kind of riff on what we just saw here, folks. I'm just fascinated by this stuff. And again, I was an atheist for 12 years, so I became super uber skeptical about everything. But I really like the idea of people that push back against the dominant narrative. And those are often the people that are the trailblazers that change history or the way we approach history or how we see things. We see Darwin was push back against Darwin, the dominant narrative about people believing, that in creation. We have this idea, these trailblazers of people that have changed history or how we view history. And growing up, basically Clovis first, and if you believed anything other than that, you were a heretic.
Yeah.
And I've had a variety of conversations with Thomas Murphy. Again, folks, this is all off the record stuff. I mean, not that this is off the record what I'm going to talk about. I'm just saying this is stuff that I have much broader conversations with a lot of interesting people. And I reached out to Thomas Murphy and I said, there's that site in Pennsylvania that they say, well, that was corrupted by the coal mines and that's the dates don't work. And it's like, we got to rethink everything about the settling of the New World. Okay. And when I say Clovis first, that was the idea that they found those Clovis tips, and that was essentially they thought that basically that was the first civilization.
Yeah.
That was the oldest, and
Exactly.
those are the originators
Yeah,
of
and the
all.
land bridge and yeah.
Yeah, over the land bridge and all that kind of stuff. But now we understand, like, there were alternative means of not just land bridges, but we also know when the oceans were much lower, you could have hugged the coast and gone and found your way into North America that way, into whether it be the United States or all that. So we have a better understanding of how humans travel. And the fact is we I mean, I don't know, maybe just talk a little bit about that, diffusionism in general. Basically, I think most people admit we don't know how great of an extent there was of diffusion, but we are starting to think that there was some. And people in the anthropologists and archaeological community are at least starting to rethink their previous held positions.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at the American mounds and you cross over to the British Isles, they're the same. Their mounds look very similar. So, what kind of travel was going on then, and would it have been easier with the lower ice caps, perhaps? And to your earlier point about 10,000 BC, Göbekli Tepe and Graham Hancock, he talks about the younger Dryas, right?
Right.
Where either a comet or solar flare hits and the world dramatically, the caps start melting and the oceans rise dramatically. And off of India, Dwarka, underground city of Krishna, completely underwater. Egypt has a city. So, I mean, it's not debated, right? There are civilizations that are covered in water now. And then you got to think about, well, yeah, Atlantis, there's got to be some truth to those myths and those legends. And Plato wrote about it, not as a metaphor. Plato believed it. So we should look at this stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just interesting to, and again, too, this is the other thing, too, is I don't people who poo-poo this kind of stuff realize that, look, there are young kids who watch these things. Their imaginations are just like, wow, this is really cool, and then they'd end up becoming anthropologists and archaeologists and stuff and studying. They watch the Raiders of the Lost Ark and they become archaeologists. I think
Yep.
it's really important that these things don't, can play a role actually in helping people question things and investigate things and try to find things and rewrite history. That's what we all want to do, right? We want to all make that discovery or do that one thing that really changes the world. Not that we all want to do that, but it'd be kind of cool to think of yourself being able to do that. So I just like to have conversations like this to get people to think, this doesn't fit nicely or neatly into the Book of Mormon timeline by any means, right? It does a little bit, but it does not.
Yeah.
So it's not a home run, that proves the Book of Mormon, but at least gives plausibility,
Yeah, plausibility, exactly.
to it, especially when the Book of Mormon tells us that they did use metal tools, and we have things that were used that were chipped with metal tools. The one question I do have for you is those slates that were apparently commercially created, and then, I mean, you would agree that there has to be. I mean, you're kind of making the steelman argument, but you would have to concede that some of these things definitely probably were forgeries, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and that is my conclusion. I think that there were originals that were genuine. I don't know how many, but then people like Soper Scottford saw an opportunity and started manufacturing some of them. So I think a lot of them are fake, but I think a lot of the original ones, early ones, were genuine. And that's the problem in archaeology. If you get one bad apple in the bunch, that scholars just won't touch it. It poisons it. It's
Yeah,
really
it
unfortunate.
is. So what
Yeah.
do we have? So the mystic symbol. So you're saying, so that, and this is, a lot of people have even said that the mystic symbol might even be representative of the nails that for that of Christ, like when he was nailed to the cross. I think I've heard people speculate that a little bit.
Yeah.
But so basically, so you're saying is that there may and still are some original items that are authentic, and then that and again, this is interesting too, because Thomas Murphy brought up the fact, like, hey, if any of them are proven to be authentic, they should be given back to the tribes. However, these
Yeah.
items seem to be not Native American in origin, in the sense that they seem to be origins from people like Coptic. So it almost have to be like, we would almost have to return these items back to the Coptic
Yeah.
church, right?
Gets really complicated. And just up in his area too, in Washington, Kennewick man caused a lot of problems, right? Because the DNA showed he's Caucasian. So what tribe does it go to, right? It gets really complex.
Yeah, and
And
just so you know, Thomas Murphy, they actually address that issue,
did
in,
they?
yeah, so in Southerton as well. They actually addressed that in their paper, that kind of was, kind of in one sense inspired by the interview that, Tom. So I'll try to get you that paper so you can read it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd be interested to see what they say about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, but to your point, history is more complicated than we think, and it's not so clear cut that if it was pre-Columbian, then they had to be Native Americans. Who knows? A lot of people got around. I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. You just never do know, and again, it's just something to think about. For those of you who are experts in the field and you want to weigh in on this, please do. Want to hear what you have to say. If you think they're all fraudulent, it's all baloney, well, yeah, that's fine. Let us know what your thoughts are on that. For those of you who think maybe there is some validity to these plates, we'd like to hear from you. And for those of you who think they're all legit, let's hear that position too. I like having these conversations with people. And Alex, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program to share this presentation with the group. I had asked you, I said, hey, why don't you put together a slideshow? You did it within a week. And I said, because I like visual images, especially when we're describing these things. I just wanted to ask you, was there any final words or that you would like to share with the audience, or some final thoughts?
I don't think so. I just wanted to thank you and for the work you're doing. I'm a big fan and I appreciated this opportunity. And I guess my message to people is just stay curious, right? Let's look at things and give things a chance and let's keep learning.
Let's keep learning. I love it, folks. There will be links in the descriptions to that article that you wrote, and any other links that you want to send me, Alex, so that you can get a hold of maybe that Nephite Explorer episode. send
Yeah.
those to me, and I'll get that in the show notes as well. Also in the links there are for our store, our merch store, mormonbookreviews.com, where you can get hats and items and coffee or hot chocolate mugs, excuse me, and other items. And also for those of you who support us financially, we do appreciate it. You want to support us on Venmo, PayPal, or sign up to be a Patreon. It's always greatly appreciated, the people for your financial support. It helps keep this thing going, and it enables me to travel and pay my way to speak at conferences, and people also make just donations to help me on my trips too. And I want to thank those of you who've done that as well. I really do appreciate you. And remember, the most important thing is this, folks: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.